Thank you for remembering we started again. And next week we'll be here too. We have one of our missionaries coming next week, Ken Axelson, who's Athletes in Action. And he'll be talking about the mission and what's happening with it during Sunday school time. So please come and support him. It's important that he has somebody to talk to and not empty pews next Sunday. So, and then this is our last lesson on loving your enemy. We started in September with loving God, and then working up to loving your enemy with loving God, loving your neighbor, loving one another, and then eventually getting to loving your enemy. And what does that mean? How does it flesh itself out? What does it look like? And so let me pray, and we'll get started with that to conclude our class. Father, I thank you for this time today. I thank you for your love for us, and I pray, dear God, that you will bless us in this time. And as we conclude our series we've had, may we not conclude our learning and our practicing of loving others. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. So, how has the last several months affected you with looking at reviewing loving God, loving your neighbor, who your neighbor is, and loving others, and then eventually loving your enemy? And what does that mean? What kind of, has it had any effect on you at all? And I'm looking for your testimony concerning anything in your thinking or in your actions, or what you're still struggling with, or I just want to hear what have we accomplished, or what do we still need to work on after doing this for these last October, November, January, 4 months. So, comments, Doris.
Well, I'll give you an update because we kind of put it all out to you about our Christmas.
Yes.
We worked on our hearts after the class, okay, and got our hearts right first with God, because until you do that, you're not going to be effective.
Nope.
And on Christmas Eve, we loved on that nephew.
Good.
And
how did he receive it? He liked it probably, right?
I don't know. We didn't overkill.
Okay.
Okay, but he got a hug.
He got a hug?
Yeah, he got a hug, which the last time he had to hug me because I wasn't hugging him.
Okay, I see.
And as of yesterday, I went out to breakfast with my granddaughter, and she said, "How could you two do that?"
Really? She noticed?
To the family.
She noticed, huh?
Yeah.
She noticed you hugged her.
Well, she heard it secondhand because they didn't go.
Oh, I see.
They didn't go to Christmas Eve at Grandma's. So it's a work in progress.
Good.
And we got to explain to her that, you know, he has to answer for himself, but we have to answer for us.
How did it make you feel spiritually doing that?
Good.
Good. Any other? I saw somebody over this side.
Like Doris said, I've been working on my heart with the Bible study I've been going to with Nancy and all, and this. And with going out and about in the community, and you see the transgender, I used to kind of walk around or away from them and wouldn't say anything. But about a month and a half ago, one of them approached me, and I've been trying to work on my facial expression because
you can say a lot with your face.
Yeah. And I think just saying hello without having a dislike or something said a lot.
And we have to remember, all sinners are sinners.
Right.
Right. So everybody needs the Lord. And what particular, you might be turned off by whatever kind of sin sinners do, but somebody else is turned off by the kind of sins that you do. So. But that's good. Good. I'm happy to hear that. That's good. Any other comments or?
I have one.
Go ahead.
So I have a dad and a stepmother that live in Texas that they don't want anything to do with our family. But I have connected to her on social media. I always think it's like always the right thing to do, even when they're cruel. And so what I worked on is the loving boundary that we were talking about, where sometimes, I mean, you love, you forgive and all that, but sometimes you set a boundary not just for yourself, but even caring about their sin, like creating a dynamic that can cause them to sin somehow, which, you know, is complicated. But so anyway, I use my social media like as a ministry. I know that I do. It's going to be misunderstood always, but that's what I do. And she, the other day, posted something super cruel and humiliating. She has no relationship with me, so I don't know. But she did. And it always, it's so devastating to me, because I don't get it. But I realized enough is enough. I will love her and forgive her and disconnect from her. And like that's okay. The that's okay part is the part I'm referring to, because that's hard for me. Because I always feel wrong, like that would be wrong. It's not wrong, and I have complete peace about it. So I deleted what she wrote, unfriended her.
Did you just hear what she said? She
Delete.
deleted, so you don't go back and read it again.
Yeah, because it was killing me.
That's
it was
right.
like humiliating me and killing me. So I'm like, no. But the peace, because I prayed, obviously, but the piece of it's okay to unfriend her. Like that's helpful for me in serving the Lord, and it's also loving her to not give her the opportunity to do that. Anyway, that's
Okay.
me.
Making some progress anyway? Any others want to share some things, or what did you find in the study that you thought was very hard and maybe even impossible to do? Find anything or say anything or hear anything? I still struggle with how do you have the attitude that I've seen the martyrs have, especially like those Coptic Egyptians when they were faced by ISIS and were taken to a beach and all beheaded, and to have that gentleness and that quietness and peace in the Lord. I think that I'm hoping that should that day ever come, I would have his peace at that time. But as I would anticipate it, I don't have peace. Because I anticipate, if I were to anticipate it, I would have a lot of concerns. But, and in all honesty, and I've had to think about that when going to Malawi because of the Muslims that persecute there. And so it's not like it's not something that you don't think about or haven't given some thought to, don't dwell on it, but to think about. And again, you just got to leave it in the hands of the Lord. That should happen, He's going to give you the grace at that time. And I think that's an important thing to understand. God's going to give us the grace at the time that we need it to handle what we have to handle. But the big part is to have an attitude before that ever happens that says, I want to please God. And that's got to be first. It can't be that I have a right to be angry and this, I don't care about them, this is what I'm going to do, I'll shoot them, you know. That doesn't come first. What comes first is I got to have an attitude. I need to please God in this situation because I need to be pleasing Him in all things, even the hard things, even the tough things. I need to please Him. Sorry you guys are jumping in on the end of this. We had 4 months of talking about it and looking at the verses, but we'll catch it starting. Oh, and I also want to tell you that in 2 weeks we'll be starting a new Sunday school, adult Sunday school class dealing with getting the most out of your Bible. I challenge you to read 1 Samuel, and I've talked about this a few times in the 40 years of being here, and I'll talk about several more should God give me more years, which is I want to help us to make this book a smaller book, to make it easier to read, to make it easier to understand, to especially as you're reading through some of the Old Testament passages which you may not be as familiar with and with things that happen. Here's one of the issues I found in the Old Testament I thought I'd bring out today too before I had my summary statements. In the Old Testament, well, for example, let's look at Psalm 3 for a minute. This is only one example of many. I've had people say to me, well, how are we supposed to love our enemy? Look at what David prayed. Look at Psalm 3, verse 7. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw and break the teeth of the wicked. Okay, did we just destroy the whole class?
No, but it's God, it's for God to do it, right?
That's the first point, Pam. He's asking God to take the vengeance.
Right.
And what you need to see many times in the Psalms is that they're asking the Lord to take the vengeance. But there's also times where they talk a lot about asking God, you know, with an attitude about their enemies. And one of the things that's different from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant is that under the Old Covenant, Israel was a theocracy, a God-ruled nation. And the only way they, as a God-ruled nation, were going to stay following God as a nation, not necessarily everybody being a believer, but following God as a nation, was they were not to be entangled with whom? The world around them, all the nations around them, because what would they lead them off to do?
Sin, right?
Idolatry, right? And when if you've read anything in the Old Testament, you realize how many times Israel went off going after other gods, and the Lord having to chastise them because of it. And so their enemies were actually physical enemies. They, as a nation, had a responsibility to actually use capital punishment against those that were trying to overtake them because of the idolatry and being led astray to leave God to follow other gods. And so the whole idea about warfare and all, you can't use you should not be using the Old Testament to teach alone, to teach what is God's view of warfare. You need to combine both Old and New Testaments to understand those things. And then what was the responsibility of a nation, and then what's the responsibility of you as an individual Christian. We need to see those two things too. So when you see these things in the Old Testament, and in the book of Psalms with the prayers of the authors of the Psalms asking God to destroy their enemies, and I hate my enemies, and things of that nature, we need to realize that to say they hate their enemies is to say they hate the sin. They hate the idolatry that they bring. They hate all that. So you're going to come across some of those things. So don't go to the book of Psalms or some of the Old Testament passages to prove that you can hate your nephew. And you can pray that his teeth all crack or something. But I wanted to bring that up, okay? Just as a balance. All right, let's look at something else to conclude with today, some things I wanted to bring to your attention. Let's look at Luke 23. There are 2 points that I want to make as we conclude how does loving your enemy work out? What does it look like? Loving God, loving others, loving your brother, and loving your neighbor. In Luke 23,
Maybe verse 34.
yes, verse 34. Before we get, we're going to start in verse 32. Okay? Luke 23, verse 32. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with Jesus to be crucified. This is the crucifixion of Christ. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And the people stood watching, and the rulers even sneering at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him, and they offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." And there was written a notice above which read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." This is the account of Jesus' crucifixion, and if there's any time where physically and emotionally he should have been weak, and wanted to use his own powers was at the crucifixion account. He had just been arrested. Remember all the things that happened in his arrest, what they did to him with a false trial, how he was arrested to begin with Judas betraying him with a kiss, and then Peter reacting as many would react, taking out a sword and swiping the guy, and he missed him. He's either a very good swordsman or a very bad swordsman, because he just cut off his ears, all he managed to do. And Jesus healed it immediately and put it back on. That should have been enough right there to send everybody home.
Yeah.
If Jesus healed the man's ear right there, those soldiers should just say, okay, we're gone, we're out of here, you know, but they didn't. And they go to the trial, and then at the trial, he's punched and kicked and mocked and things, and then he goes before Pilate, and before Pilate, he is mocked again as a king with the robe they put on him, and they weave a crown of thorns, and the thorns in Israel, as in many parts of that area of the world, are about 2 inches long, acacia thorns, and they're very hard, like a nail, but very sharp, like a pin. And they wove together a crown. It would be not a crown that would, it'd be like a whole helmet crown, and they jammed it on his head, and how that had to feel. Then they took their staff that they mocked him with, and they beat him on the head with that crown. So they're hitting these. I mean, this is great torture. It's painful, very painful. And they you know, drag him out, make him carry the cross as far as he can, and they get to Golgotha, and they there crucify him. They all put nails in his hands and his feet. Then they ram the pole into the ground, and you thunk, boom, and then you have to put pressure on your feet in order not to drown or suffocate. So just keep yourself up. You put pressure on your feet, so how much that had to hurt. You understand all the pain he went through, the scourging, and just all this. He gets to the end of it all. They're still going to verbally mock him, as we just read. They're saying, you know, if you are the king, come on down. Did he have the power to come down?
Yes.
He sure did. Did they kill him?
No.
No, he gave up his life. He surrendered it. But in this situation, Jesus, I think, helps us with something. In order to fulfill the commandments to love, especially your enemy, we need to have the attitude of Jesus. And you start first with your attitude. Doris mentioned with her heart, which is attitude as well. With your heart's got to be in the right place. Your attitude has to be in the right place. And he says, Father, in verse 34, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And here are, if he has enemies, these are enemies, right? They're killing the guy. And or they're trying to anyway. And his attitude of his heart at this time is not, I've had enough, you know, leave me alone. He's not yelling and screaming. He says, Father, forgive them. It's one of the greatest lessons that we all can learn about in Christianity, and having this attitude, realizing that, why is he saying forgive them? Because where are they going to face, should God not forgive them? What will they face for eternity? They're going to face the wrath of God in hell for all eternity. And surely, being forgiven for something they do temporally isn't anywhere near the consequence of eternal suffering.
Does it say anywhere in the Bible if after Jesus was crucified, if those soldiers ever?
No. The only thing close to it is where soldiers, after it happened, they remarked, surely he was the Son of God. But we don't know what soldiers it was. And it doesn't even say that they trusted him, they just made that remark. You gotta remember, they're in a pluralistic society. The belief in many gods, pluralism, the belief in many gods. And to add one to many is not salvation. It's possible to say, well, he was the Son of God, but then here's Zeus, and here's this one, and here's that one. They could have many gods. So that doesn't, we can't equate that with salvation. We'd have to be told. Okay? So, having the attitude of, Father, forgive them. You can't begin to love as God commands us to love without having that attitude. And that attitude is built upon the fact that there is an eternity to be faced and there's vengeance from God to be faced. And surely, whatever someone may do against you cannot equal what the pain and the punishment of hell will be for them for all eternity. Surely it can't. And we need to recognize that and step it up a few notches and not wish them to go to hell, not wish them to pay for this forever. Jesus really hits the nail on the head for us there. So that's the first thing, is we need to always check our attitude, have the attitude that Jesus displayed. If you're having a hard time knowing what to do in any circumstance, whatever it may be that you come across, go to the Gospels and look for Jesus and how does he apply himself to that problem you're having. It may not, it's not going to be indeed the same thing, but it will be the same. And you look for how did he handle it? What did he do? How did he go through the situation? He is the best commentary on what to do. Someone said the best commentary on the Sermon on the Mount is the life of Christ. And I agree with that. That's the best commentary. And it's on the Sermon on the Mount that we learn, love and don't hate, and pray for, if you remember. Okay, so the first thing is check your attitude. Have the same attitude as that of Jesus. Let's go over to Romans 10. Romans 10. Excuse me. Romans 5. I don't think I got it. Yeah, Romans 5. I was dyslexic in my writing here. Instead of having 10:5 or 5:10, I wrote 10:5. Isaac struggles with that. I don't know if Isaac and Michael both do. They have a hard time reading because of it. They didn't know what it was for years. And Michael went through college and made it through three and a half years. And Isaac with his other stuff, and only later did he learn that his problem is because of this. And so if he watches something or listens to something, he catches it so much quicker if he tries to read it. And even Isaac told me, even writing reports for work, sometimes it takes him so long because he has to go back and read what he wrote to be sure it's not backwards. So Romans 5, and we'll begin with verse 6. And what I want you to look at here is, how has God treated you? Okay? Watch. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the good people of Neptune. No! He died for the ungodly. And that's the thing to see. Remember what we were before you became a believer, if you are a believer, for the ungodly. And look at what it says here. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, when did he put that love on us?
When he died.
While we were still sinners, before we ever believed, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So the idea is that God takes the initiative to love us. And as sinners, how bad were our sins before God? Well, they were so bad that God had to punish them in his own Son, his righteous Son, Jesus, so that we could be forgiven. So while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Verse 8, since we now have been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, there you go, Why does God say love your enemies?
You were.
Because he does it. Because he does it. He never asks you to do anything he doesn't do himself. Remember that? Can't hear you.
I said never gives you more than you can handle.
Yep, never gives us no temptation more than we can endure. But he demonstrates how to love your enemies by the way he loved me. And so when you think back, what did I do against God in my life and my attitudes, and how did I, mock him and do other things? I remember when I was in high school, in my junior year, I had solved trigonometry in mathematics. And the room we went to, the math room we went to, there was a girl, I later found out who it was. There was a girl who used to leave notes in the desk where she sat, and they were usually scriptures. Or it was stuff like, do you know God? And questions like that. Well, being an unbeliever in my junior year, what did I do about those things?
Threw 'em out.
Laugh and throw them
I
out.
mocked. I didn't throw them out. I used them to show other kids and make fun of her. Because when I found out who it was, and I made fun of her. And she was not a really popular person in school.
This wasn't Alice, was this past?
No, it wasn't Alice.
I just had to ask.
No, I would never make fun of her anyway, because I wanted to avoid the opportunity to get a date from her. I wanted to make fun of her. She was not a very popular person. She wasn't in part of the in crowd, and she was a bit of a wallflower when it came socially being involved. But she was a believer, and she was leaving these things, and I used to mock her. So when I became a Christian my senior year in high school, I went to her and apologized. And she's one of the first people that I told in school, other than Alice, of course, that I had become a Christian. And she started crying. Yeah. You don't know all that I've done against the Lord, and he loves me. And all that others have done in your family or your friendship or work against the Lord, he can love them too in coming to faith in Christ. And while we were his enemies, we were reconciled. That means brought back into a right relationship to him through the death of his son. What did it cost him to love his enemies?
His life.
The death of his son. What does it cost you to love your enemies?
Death of our son.
Yeah, dying to self.
Dying to self, a good attitude, and usually it's going to involve forgiveness. You don't have to pay the price of the forgiveness, thankfully, but we need to give it. And that's the price of peace, of living at peace with your enemies, is having a good attitude, dying to self, but giving forgiveness, giving them your forgiveness, and treating them as such is one of the things that makes it possible. And he says here, go back to where I was.
Verse 10.
Yeah, so while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled through him through the death of his son. How much more, if we be reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? And that's our bottom line. The bottom line for believers is no one and nothing can ever hurt you. No one and nothing can ever separate you from the love of God. And once it's been placed upon you. So you don't have to fear what others fear. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to worry what's going to happen to you. You don't have to worry, will people still accept you, or what will people think of you, or these other things. You don't have to let that be a problem to you, because God accepts you, God loves you, that's all that matters. When I was in high school, I was a popular kid. I was one of the in-crowd kids. I was captain of every team. I played on football, track, whatever it had to be. I was class president my junior and senior year. I was president of the Key Club, an organization. I was president of the varsity club. I was president of the Red Cross Association. If there was a chance to run for presidency, I did it. I ran for it. And I was a likable kid. I made it my goal that if a teacher was a crabby old teacher, I was going to get that teacher to like me, and I would butter them up and be the nicest, sweetest person in the world to them. I did it for all the wrong reasons. I did it, other than the athletic stuff, which came naturally, the other stuff I did because I wanted people to like me. I was very insecure. I was the second of two children my parents had. I had an older brother and then me. And I always felt that they picked on me and they let him get away with murder. And that's 80% true. But I was very insecure. If anything ever went wrong in the family, it was Jimmy did it. So when God saved me, now I was a terrible class president. I really was. Our advisor did more of the work than I did. You know, and then I realized I would never run for class president. I knew I had to give a speech at graduation or some of these other things. But I did all those things because I wanted tangible proof that I was liked by others. And it was, to me, a popularity contest. And so when God saved me, He worked a lot on me. And what He worked on, first and foremost, I wasn't a big drinker. I never drank. I respected my parents. I knew my dad would kill me or kick me out of the house, whatever, if he ever caught me drinking in high school. So I never did those things. I never got in trouble. That's part of wanting people to accept you, you know. But when God first saved me, the things that changed weren't first on the outside. Because I was a decent kid, so you didn't see me, you know, I didn't go from a kid that was mean and nasty to a kid that was nice and calm. But He started working on the inside. And what He started to change was this fact that I could find my security and my acceptance in my relationship to Him and not what other people thought of me. You know how freeing that is? To be able to stop worrying about what people think of you and stop, and now I never stopped completely. I still struggle with it at times and I have to get the victory over it. But when you live in trying to please others, guess what happens? You'll never please God. Because why?
You're too busy focusing on pleasing.
Too busy, but you'll never do what? Please everybody.
That too.
There'll be somebody that won't be pleased. I don't care, you know, when you are a servant and you serve people, there will be people who aren't pleased. Were you a waiter at Temple? You can knock yourself out, right? To serve people, get them what they want, take back something that's perfect, bring another one, and they still jip you on the tip. They still don't think much of the placing of you because certain people you just can't please. But that's not an excuse then to hate them. That's not an excuse to treat them harshly or unkindly. Because God tells us that as a Christian, we are to check our attitude and be like Jesus in that attitude and then to forgive. And the only way a waiter, I love waiters. I love people. I try to tip waiters the highest I can. Because if you're going to serve me, I'm going to encourage you. And when they have waited on you and they've had a bad experience, if you're the next person they're going to wait on, you usually know they had a bad experience before you, right?
They're basically.
Right then?
They tells you that.
Why? Or what do you like when that happens?
You just get very demoralized. People can tell.
Yeah, and they see you down, and you're not happy and friendly. You're down with it. Well, that happens all day long with things. Don't let people ruin your day. Don't let your enemies destroy you. Give forgiveness and get back to serving. That's the greatest way to have a Christ-like attitude, is give forgiveness and get back to serving.
Because giving forgiveness isn't all about for them, it's about you, your inner attitude.
Yeah, it can be for them too, right? But it's first and foremost about you. There's that old adage, when you forgive somebody, you set a prisoner free, and you might help the other guy.
Yeah.
Right. Giving forgiveness and get back to serving. And I'm glad we can reduce it to those little common denominators, those little things, which is you love them, and when you're having, Bill, help me with this answer. I know you know it. When you're having a problem loving them, what do? You serve them, and that's how you'll love them. Every time. Where's our example? Jesus. He didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. And we had a balance in our teaching by John Piper with a video which was very good. On there are times where you don't reconcile with an enemy and bring them back. It's not wise to do that. And he used the example of a child molester, things of that nature. You can forgive, but you don't give another chance. So we had some balance, I thought, with it, with the things that he said. And you need to bring that balance in. But the thing most of all is to have the attitude of Jesus that Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And with that heart of forgiveness, you now can do what you have to do practically and physically to maintain peace. And it may be you have to separate from the person, you have to call the police on the person. It may be many things, but it has to come from a heart that is forgiving and wants to follow God. Okay? So check your attitude and treat others as God has treated you, because you one time were his enemy. But who took the initiative to change that relationship? You?
God did.
No, God did.
Yeah.
Right? So, thank you for your attention. We're 5 minutes early today. Pam?
I just have another example that I don't know this person, but I heard of it when I was living in Alabama for a while. He went evangelizing for they were having a revival type thing. And he went to house all the time, and everybody knows everybody there, usually. So this one person was very vile and spit in his face. And he said, "Thank you, I never felt more like Jesus than him." And that person said to the Lord.
That's good.
Wow, that's amazing.
Hope he said it with the right attitude.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure he did, because how
He
could
must
that now?
have. He must have.
Otherwise.
Okay. My only reaction as a kid I had when somebody spit in my face was I had more anger than I've ever been in my life.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's an insult, but Jesus got it all the time.
Go to basic training back in the 80s.
No, thank you. I don't want to go to basic training in the 20s, in the 2000s. Okay, let's go ahead and you can go back. I think the coffee's probably ready.
Yeah.
And then next week, don't forget, please come and support Ken Axelson. Be here at 9:15. Support Ken. And then in 2 weeks, we start with our class on learning to read. And what we're going to do is we're going to first start with know the storyline. When you know the storyline of a book, it's easier to read the book.
Is
Yeah.
that like the outline pastor kind
Oh, that's the thing.
of? Okay.
Yeah, the storyline is what's this book going to be about? That's what we'll see, okay? So thank you for your attention. You're all dismissed. Go have some coffee. You're there. My wife is serving today, so if she gets upset, blame me. Don't blame me. You're welcome.
There we go, we got the first bell. Yeah, I'm gonna go get coffee.
And then her dad's Charles.
But I didn't know what to do until
And you said he's supposed to leave.
Yeah, that one, I think I showed that one to you.